Dear Father Simon and the congregation, this tale begins in November 1999 when two work colleagues and I were having a well-earned day off on a work trip to Fort Lauderdale, USA, following a 5-day conference. On the day in question, we'd spent part of the day on a helicopter ride as a special reward for our hard work, paid for by the company that we were working for at the time, which had nothing to do with anything aviation related, I should add. I was fortunate enough to have got the co-pilot seat, so I spent the entire flight chatting to the pilot and quizzing him about his helicopter, a Sikorsky S-92, if I remember correctly. After returning to the hotel, we decided to make the most of our last night before returning home, so we hit the local bars. Unlike myself, though, both John and David were young and unattached and were keen to see if any Fort Lauderdale ladies would be wooed by their quintessential English accents.
Hello.
You know how that works.
Oh, yes, good evening, hello. Not that I've ever done that on radio at all.
Okay, let's just fade Nigel out there. We headed off to the local piano bar, and while I went to get the drinks in, John and David went to scour the place for potential American friends. I'd just got served, and they both returned. Crikey, or words to that effect, said John. There's a load of girls in here. Big problem, though, said David. The place is rammed with Richard Gere types out of an officer and a gentleman. Now, as non-locals, we weren't to know that the aircraft carrier USS George Washington had recently come into port. But after a few sips of their beers, John and David decided shiny uniforms were no match for English accents and left me in peace while they went off to try their luck. I watched as they entered an adjacent room full of very attractive American women and, of course, about 400 very attractive US Navy officers. I didn't fancy their chances personally, but I was looking forward to watching them try. Before I knew it, they were both engaged in talking to a group of 3 naval officers and 3 local women. They'd been talking to the small group for about 15 minutes when John turned round and pointed right at me. I just waved out of politeness, but I began to feel a little bit nervous as they all kept looking at me. Eventually, 2 of the officers started walking towards me. "Hey, let me buy you a drink," says one of them. What?
Is the accent
There's so many Americans in this.
Good.
They're all going to have exactly the same voice.
They really? Hot diggity dog. Yeah.
While he went to the bar, the other officer joined me, pulled up a stool and said, "So, you fly them copters?"
I do fly them copters.
My big match.
Before I could answer, his colleague reappeared with my beer and added, "Hey, your friend, you flown many..."
Was this Mexican? Go on. Is he my friend?
Your friend told us you flown many sorties during the Gulf War. And that you're here test flying the new Sikorsky S-92 helicopter for the RAF. Is that right?
Oops.
I didn't know what to say. I looked towards my so-called friends who were now seizing their opportunity and were fully engaged in their own conversations with the 3 American women, now liberated of their American friends. "Well," I said, becoming all Hugh Granty, I don't really like talking about it. Strictly speaking, that wasn't a lie. "Ah, no, of course not. Gee, no, the other," says the other officer. This is a completely other one. Just then, the other officer who'd been with David and John appeared with an older, and very distinguished gentleman with more medals across his chest than I could count. "Can I introduce you to the commanding officer of the aircraft carrier USS George Washington?" One of them said. The commanding officer held out his hand and said, "It's a great pleasure to meet a distinguished Brit veteran. Tell me, is it true you're test flying the Sikorsky S-92 over here?" I nearly did a Basil Fawlty and pretended to faint on the spot because I could think of no way of getting out of this. But instead I started telling him about how nimble I thought the Sikorsky had handled today and that it was faster than I had expected. "A pretty neat piece of kit," I said. And then, thinking back to what the pilot had told me during our trip during the day, I added, "I'd say it's a lot quicker than the S-70, that's for sure." Captain of the USS George Washington and his commanding officer nodded in agreement. Then the captain says, "We're thinking about changing from the MH-60S Seahawk helicopter on the carrier, and the Sikorsky's been mentioned. Let me introduce you to someone else." Oh no, not another voice. A less friendly looking, that's a stage direction, that is. suddenly appeared, and more introductions, compounding the earlier lie, ensued. After an uncomfortably strong handshake from the Air Wing commander, he says...
Has he got the stutter?
Just trying to...
Here he comes again. Come on, everyone.
So he says, so...
Oh!
That's
Sounds
too friendly.
familiar.
So, would you like the Sikorsky?
What's this?
Tell me,
Sean Connery?
That's Deputy Dog. It is Deputy Dog.
would you like this Sikorsky? Sure, I said, my voice getting unrealistically high.
Yeah.
Sticking to my story. It's not everything I'd like in a chopper, I said, but it's quicker than the S-70. He nodded. I thought I'd gotten away with it, but then he added, that's good, but what about its downward thrust dissipation? Would it be suitable for an aircraft carrier? Well, perhaps, I replied. However, can I just ask you just to hold that question a minute, sir? I'm afraid I have to go to the washroom. Damn shrapnel and all that.
What?
I knew then that I had... Second World War reference.
Obviously.
I had to get out, and it could only get worse if I stayed around. As I headed for the washrooms, I grabbed David and John rather violently, has to be said. You two, we're getting out of here, I shouted as we veered towards the exit and ran all the way back to the hotel. To this day, I still don't know how we managed to get out of that piano bar, or even Florida, without being killed for impersonating distinguished officers of the RAF. And so, Father Simon, I need forgiveness, not from the impressive Navy officers who hampered our attempts at chatting up American women, especially as technically I think the only lie I told was that I needed the bathroom. Instead, I would like to ask for your forgiveness on behalf of my shameless friends who to this day show no remorse for telling the American Navy that I was a top helicopter pilot just so that they could try and impress the ladies of Fort Lauderdale. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. A vast cast there. I mean,
Yeah,
it was.
well,
if you
yeah.
close your eyes, there was
Almost in Fort Lauderdale, weren't
Of
we?
all ages and ranks.
all
Yeah.
ages, ranks,
Yeah.
from
Nationalities.
different
Yeah.
states.
Yeah.
It was quite
It's a big,
extraordinary.
it's a big country.
Sorry about that. Anyway, Sister Bobby.
Oh, it's a close one, Joseph. But actually, it was David and John that set it up.
Absolutely.
And you kind of got landed in it, and it's really, really tricky in those situations because you don't obviously want to let your mates down either. So it's a difficult one. The thing is, and where I think I might forgive you, is you got out just where it got critical because you can't advise those Americans.
Well, he was advising the captain of the USS George Washington that the Sikorsky
he was
was
basically
better.
given his he was giving his impression, wasn't he? But he wasn't really saying you should only get this helicopter, was he? He wasn't kind of walking down that dangerous road. He was saying, yeah, you know, I liked it, but he wasn't guaranteeing that this was the best thing for it. So I think, Joseph, you just about got away with it and you bailed out just in time, but only just for me to forgive you.
Novice, what do you make of that?
Yes, I don't think he actually said, yes, it's perfect for the USS George Washington, you know, with the thrusts and
He
all
said
that.
it's quicker than the S-70.
Yeah, which is true.
It's
Which
true.
another guy told him, absolutely. No, poor old Joseph. That was one of those where you think, oh my lord, he absolutely landed in it. And I think he took the only sensible option, which was run! And he did, and fast, and grabbed his mates. So, Joseph, you got out of that well, and to this day, he must have thinking, limeys, forgiven, completely forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Oh, he's definitely forgiven. Joseph does very well, and you've got to hope that the US Navy is going slightly more in detail when it's doing its aircraft procurement, rather than just going up some bloke in the bar and saying, is it better than that one? Yes, it is. Right, we'll go with that then. He's got more downward thrust dissipation. Seen them live. So I am going to say...